Alright, it's the Ascension of Babylon. What we do here is we talk about the occult, we talk about spiritual self-development, and we talk about the healing process. And I'm going to be talking about what it's like to heal through being institutionalized. I spent a majority of my life getting locked up and being in these different institutional kinds of settings, from group homes when I was younger to juvenile lockup as well. So a lot of my teenage years I spent either in these group home institution kinds of settings or in actual jail for kids. This eventually led me to going to county jail at a young, tender age of 17. And then these cycles continued into a lot of my adulthood, to where I even landed myself in prison before I decided to change my life completely. And I lived a lot of my life in a survival stress kind of energy, to where I existed in this identity that believed that it was me versus these other people. I had these enemies, I had these ops. From a very young age, I was robbing people and committing crimes to survive. So this further solidified what this part of me believed. And of course, I created that as a reality, to where that is what it was. It was a dog eat dog world. And I felt that I needed to be like an apex predator. And in many ways, I absolutely was. I took what I wanted from people. I harmed people. When, I went to the joint, I didn't change at all. I was getting into brawls, getting into fist fights, jumping people, sometimes even getting jumped, depending on what was going on. I was always in these conflicts, always going to the hole, or, segregation, stabbing dudes up. I was putting in a lot of work in there. And that was deeply rooted in this survival stress energy. And I was also trying to control the way that people saw me. So it's like, it made me feel safer if people feared me and people respected me. People knew me as somebody that was just going to fly off the handle at any given moment. And when I was around, even if there were people that would talk shit behind my back, people would salute me, because they knew that if you said it to my face, I was going to come for you. I was going to harm you. And I didn't give a fuck what the consequences were. Before I went to state prison, knowing that I actually had a short time left potentially, I decided to stab a dude up anyway, right in front of the cops. There was like a rookie cop right there watching the whole thing. There was a camera watching it, and I didn't care. I stabbed this dude up. I kicked him while he was on the ground. And I just didn't give a fuck, because I just existed in this identity, to where it's like I needed to make a statement. I needed to make an example out of you. If you fucked with me, I was going to take it all the way. It's like, oh, you're willing to fight me? Well, then I'm going to stab you. And, so on. I just needed to always take it to that next level. And I was very known for using weapons because of that. And I looked down on people that would only fight. It's like, oh, you're only willing to fight? Well, I'm willing to break this mop stick over your head. Or I'm willing to burn you with this hot material. Or I'm willing to slice your face open. This was the kind of person that I was for a very long time. But that identity that I had created was actually driven by a fear that I wasn't necessarily willing to acknowledge. So deep down, I was actually deeply afraid of being shamed, deeply afraid of being judged, and afraid of becoming some kind of victim. So rather than becoming a victim, I became a predator. I became somebody that you didn't want to fuck with under any circumstances. This was the persona that I was projecting to the world, and I was truly a menace to society. I've met people that didn't belong to be in jail, that maybe just needed some type of help. I absolutely belonged to be in jail because I hurt a lot of people in my life. In fact, most of what I've done in my life I haven't got caught for, and I'm very thankful because today I'm a changed man and I'm a very different person. But the point is I was a menace and I was somebody that needed to be off the streets. I mean, once again, even inside of jail, I just got worse. I wasn't trying to rehabilitate myself. I was just trying to go all in and harm people and just inflate this name for myself as somebody that you did not want to play with. But once again, this was rooted in a lot of survival stress, and this was rooted in a deep fear that I wasn't willing to process. So I actually needed to kind of build this identity that I fed with all of these different violent acts that I was committing throughout the years being incarcerated. And this started with little fist fights and stuff like that in juvenile detention, so jail for kids. And it just turned into behavior that was progressively worse, leading into a lot of my adulthood. Now, in 2018, I got incarcerated for 4 years. And this is actually when I changed my life. So when I came home in 2022, I decided that I was done with the street life. I was done being a gangster. I was, done hanging around the people that I was hanging around that were just supporting this violent identity that I had created. I was done with all of it, and I did leave it behind. But I was having a lot of issues healing the parts of me that were very institutionalized and stuck in that survival stress. And this actually led to deeper substance abuse problems that than what I had before. This just led to a lot of anxiety, a lot of paranoia, the fear of even like leaving my home at times, because it's like I didn't know how to be in the middle. I didn't, I'll say it like this. I just didn't know how to be in the middle, and I didn't know if what I was sensing in my body was like a threat or not, because it's like I heard all these people, but now it's like I'm not walking around with a firearm or a weapon, and I'm not in this extreme identity that just didn't give a fuck. If it was broad daylight and you had a problem, we could get it shaken right there. We could use these, we could use that. I mean, you could get stabbed, right? Whatever it was at the time. I was a very reckless, impulsive individual a lot of my life, and that's how I kept myself safe from certain emotions that I was actually afraid to feel. But not having that identity any longer, well, now it's like all of these emotions that I was suppressing were hyperactive in my body, and I had no idea how to process that energy. I didn't know how to be anything but a gangster, but a criminal, but a convict, I didn't know how to be anybody different. So even though I had let go of that identity, I didn't know how to honor the process of going from death to rebirth, to emerge a more authentic sense of self-identity that actually gave me a real sense of safety, rather than, all of the years that I created a false sense of safety that was just rooted in bypassing and projecting myself as someone that had power and control, and, projecting myself in a way that made other people have to respect me through fear. So that's kind of what I meant by living in the middle. I didn't really just know how to, I didn't know how to just be myself without projecting myself in that way. So I felt raw. I felt naked. I felt vulnerable. And I felt very afraid now because it's like, okay, what if I'm walking down the street and then, one of the ops pulls up, or somebody that I did something to inside the joint and they want to get their get back, and I'm completely vulnerable. I wasn't a person that was carrying a weapon or a firearm anymore or anything like that, and I didn't actually want violent altercation. The old me was like, yeah, hell yeah, let's do it, motherfucker, what's up? But this me is like, no, I don't want this anymore. And I just had this fear inside of me that created so much anxiety for me. A fear of, what if my past catches up to me now that I actually give a fuck about my life? I mean, I lived with so much trauma for such a long time that I didn't give a fuck about my life. I mean, I was okay with doing life in prison. I just didn't give a fuck. And those feelings that were under the surface of the identity that I explained were a lot of the time being completely numbed out by those kinds of behaviors. And I would also use substances to help uphold that identity. I mean, think of anyone you might know in the streets. Most people abuse substances because it keeps that identity propped up. It keeps that identity alive, So I had to heal through the parts of me, or heal the parts of me, that were institutionalized and still carrying that in prison, in jail, gangster kind of energy inside of them, even though I was no longer behaving like that person, and I was no longer existing inside of an identity mask that was in relation to that old self that I had let go of. But even though I had let go of that old self, I didn't really know how to form a new identity, and I didn't know how to fully process the energies that were still living inside of my body that I used the old identity to avoid. And this led me into very unhealthy relationships that were just a form of unhealthy coping. This led me into substance abuse problems that started to get worse and worse, all the way to the point that I actually, for a short period of time, started to abuse fentanyl. And then when I stopped doing the fetty, I would drink and smoke, and I couldn't even function in my life without using these substances because I still hadn't processed the death of that old self. And once again, because that old self was a self that was utilized to bypass what I was really feeling, being a different person meant now these emotions were able to come to the surface. But I did not have the education that I'm sharing with you today, and I didn't have the awareness yet to know what was going on in my system. So I actually created experiences that, rather than supporting and healing through the trauma that was inside of my body, I created experiences that actually were very re-traumatizing and re-fragmenting. And to cope with all of this, I needed to abuse substances. I needed to lust after women. I needed to attach to certain relationships that were not healthy. All of this just to help me survive what I was feeling, because I didn't actually have the capacity, the awareness, or the education to feel through those emotions. So as I started educating myself on trauma, this is actually what kind of created a major turning point in how I related to these emotions. And as I started processing these emotions, my reality on the outside also began to change through the principle of as within, so without. So, not saying that it was always perfect, but I created relationships that were much more healthy and much more sustainable in relation to my soul's evolution. I started to make a little bit more money, and eventually I actually started like doing what I love for a living. And, even though it took a while to get the ball rolling, and I'm still getting the ball rolling, I'm not a person that has financial freedom yet, I can see a major difference in my life experience in how having a healthier, more authentic connection to who I really am changes what is manifesting in the outer external experience. So if you're a person that's, institutionalized and you're having trouble actually dealing with it, understand that it's going to be rooted in parts of you that are still actually living in the past, even if you're trying to make different decisions or you are actually making very different life choices and decisions. You can be experiencing yourself in a different way, but have parts of you that need healing and are holding on to certain memories and emotions that are associated with your past. And if you don't process those emotions, what's actually going to happen is that energetic resonance that those parts carry, it's going to manifest in your relationships. It's going to manifest in certain mental and of course emotional patterns. And in general, it's going to manifest outside of you to reflect itself back to you, which actually gives you the opportunity to realize the energetic resonance that those parts are in, so you can see that outer reflection as that externalized projection of self to get to know yourself on a better level and to end the cycles of, living a life that's not actually fulfilling to who you are, and to living a life to where it's like that old energy is following you in that way. Once again, it's showing up in people, it's showing up in drama, it's showing up in circumstances, and you might be like, damn, like I've done all of these things to try to change my life, and I'm not in the streets anymore, and I'm not a gangster, I'm not in the gang. What is going on? Why is my past following me? And the answer is because your past is living inside of your body in the form of unresolved trauma that we experience through emotional states. So being present with these emotional states as they naturally take place and kind of come through your body is actually how you heal through being institutionalized, and you end the cycles that are just associated with your past and the memories and energies that certain parts of you are actually holding on to, and existing in more of a present moment state of awareness, which takes training. Because, as children, we come into the world being very present naturally, but what actually happens is due to trauma that we experience, the fragmentation that's a result of it, and societal conditioning and programming, we fragment from that present moment state of awareness, and we form neural networks in the body that support us not being in the present. So we have to train ourselves and rewire ourselves back into that present moment state of awareness. This is actually a big part of healing through trauma, and over time this is something that I implemented to heal the parts of me that, even though I was a very different person, were still institutionalized, still looking over their shoulder, and still existing in unprocessed survival stress. So this is what I wanted to share with you today. I'm going to be making a lot more content like this because, it's beneficial for me to share and it's absolutely a privilege. But I also know it's going to be beneficial to people that are actually open to change and can relate to, living how I used to, but maybe you just don't actually know how to heal and how to become whole once again. So if you watched the whole video, thank you so much, and I'll see you in the next video.